And we are live. Welcome, welcome, beautiful souls. Welcome back to another live as we discuss my favorite book at the moment. One of my favorite books of all time, Becoming Supernatural by Dr. Joe Dispenza. I am Brittany, your manifesting mentor. I'm not a coach, I'm not a guru, but I'm a woman who lives by this work every single day, and I help others to do the same so they can live a life that they truly desire and deserve and that they are more aligned with. So I'm so honored that you're here because tonight we're diving deep into chapter 3, which is one of the most transformational chapters of the entire book, hands down. Chapter 3 is all about tuning into the quantum field, which is the space where every version of your future already exists. Now, let's think about that for a second. Every version, meaning infinite versions, meaning no matter what choices you make, every single version. That's all that first of all, infinity is a big number. So infinite versions of all possibilities, all potentials exist in this field that we are learning to tune into in chapter 3. So we're going to break down parts 1 through 3, and I'll be sharing my takeaways, I'll be sharing my personal reflections, and I'll be answering questions so that we can deepen this whole concept together. So whether you're new to this or you've been watching my readings on TikTok or on YouTube, tonight is going to activate something very powerful in you. At least I hope it do. That's the whole point. But we're going to dive right in. I won't hold you any longer, especially if you're watching the replay. I hate turning up to lives where people just sit around and wait and wait and wait, and then you got to fast forward the video. This ain't that. I'm not that. I'm not her. Anyways, um, tuning into new potentials is what the chapter starts off talking about. So let's just get straight to it. Some of my talking points, I take lots of notes and I do read from them occasionally or mostly. But Dr. Joe Dispenza says that all possible futures already exist in the quantum field. And just what I started off saying, infinite is a huge number that our brains can't even fathom. But just think about that for a moment. You might be anticipating something in your future based on what you know from your past. But Dr. Joe is explaining a concept of infinite realities existing already, which means that you don't have to create anything. It's already in existence. And so what he's walking us through is how to learn how to tune into it. So in this part of the chapter 3, he talks about how where you place your attention is where you place your energy. And most people unconsciously place their attention on the past or on a predictable future, which we now know a predictable future is only predictable because we're basing it off of the what? The past. But we have the power to direct it towards new potentials, potentials that we've never even considered. Why? Because we mostly only consider what we've already experienced. So this is why we continue to live the same reality, the same outcomes over and over again. It becomes a pattern, it becomes our personality. And as Dr. Joe says, your personality creates your what? Your personal reality. And we're trying to break that, especially if it's not what you want. So, what really stood out to me here is exactly what I said, the idea that nothing we desire is actually created. When I first started learning about manifestation, I used to think that it was actually me creating things. Dr. Joe helped me shift my mindset, especially as he talked about quantum physics and quantum reality. He helped me shift my mindset from thinking that I was creating something, which is true. Like we're not creating anything. We're just tuning into what's already there. And so I appreciate him for that because that was a huge paradigm shift for me. And if that was a paradigm shift for you, drop some fire in the comments because I want to know that this is resonating with you as it did with me. He said that it's not that we're creating anything, it's that it already exists, it's already available, and our only job is to learn how to tune into it. And that tuning starts with focus, right? That word focus is going to be very important as we shift into the next part, which is part 2. But before we do, I took some questions ahead of time. Some people submitted some questions, and we're going to go through them really quick. Not really quick. We chilling. It's Tuesday after 8. Thank you for showing up. But first question is, how do I know if I'm practicing? Oh, wait, I'm sorry. How do I know if I'm placing my attention on the past instead of the future that I want? Really good question. I would say you'll know by the way you feel. Usually, when I'm feeling a certain way, I can trace it back to what I'm thinking about. And that will tell me everything I need to know about what I'm focused on. So, if you're constantly rehearsing what didn't work, if you're constantly rehearsing who hurt you or worrying if it'll happen again, your energy is anchored in those realities in the past, right? And so that is now governing how you feel in this present moment. So, when you're truly focused on a new future, you'll feel possibility, not proof. In other words, you won't need the proof because when you feel into a new potential, a new reality, it will give your body a taste of fulfillment. Your emotions will be in alignment as if it's happening or it happened, right? So you'll feel relieved. You'll feel a lot lighter. You'll feel probably more content, happier, less frustration, obviously, because you got the thing, at least in imagination. And again, your subconscious mind does not know the difference between something that is real and something that is imagined. And this is why we do this work so that we can literally take our power back, because there's so many things in our reality that rob us of the opportunity to create or tune into, because remember, we are not creating anything, it's already created, but it robs us out of the opportunity of tuning into what we prefer, because now we know that whatever we tune into is what we help materialize and collapse into this reality. So we're not creating anything. We're tuning into potentials that then, once repetitiously repeated, or same word, isn't it? Anyway, Brittany, when we repeatedly tune into a frequency, a reality that has a specific signature, we are helping it to collapse into matter. I can't talk tonight. I don't know what's up with that. Anyways, we're going to move on to question 2. That was a great question. Question number 2 says, what does it mean to tune into a potential in the quantum field? Um, think of it like a radio, right? Like when you're tuning into, let's say you want to listen to my favorite radio station here in South Florida is 99 Jams. So 99 Jams is 99.1 FM. If you want to listen to 99 Jams, but your radio is currently on 105.9 or something like that, shout out to Hot 105. But if you're tuned into 105.9, you're not going to be able to hear what's actually on 99.1, which is 99 Jams. You will be listening to something totally different or a bunch of static. I don't know how old you are to understand radios, but if you know a millennial or anybody older, please ask them what that's about. I have to remember generationally certain things that exist. That's so funny. I feel so old. But yeah, so just think about it like a radio. Every possible future is broadcasting its own signature, right? Like every reality has its own signature frequency. Everything is energy. When you're tuned into that particular reality, it's like dialing in to that station that you want to listen to. And so you tune to a new future by thinking the thoughts, feeling the emotions, and embodying the energy of that future self right now. So the moment your energy matches the signal, you start attracting the life aligned with it. The moment you dial into the right station number, you start tuning into whatever that frequency is that station is putting out, whatever that reality is. I hope that makes sense. I tried to use that analogy. All good though. So if there are no other questions in the chat, let me check. Nope, we're kind of quiet. I got a quiet crew. But you know what I love about my quiet crew? You guys come through after I've already gone live. So if you're watching this and you're guilty, yeah, I see you. But it's all good because y'all have some really good questions that I like to engage y'all in my comment section. Also, if you're watching this, whenever you're watching this, I don't care how long it's been, I comment back on my videos, and plenty of my people write on my videos long after. So shout out to y'all. We're still building community, y'all, and learning from each other in the comment section. This gives me liberty to move on to part 2, which is where Dr. Joe Dispenza talks about brain changes. So some of my talking points that I wrote down, He talks about how where you place your attention repeatedly rewires your brain. He talks about how you are literally changing your neural circuitry by focusing on new possibilities instead of rehearsing old memories. Now, what does that mean? That means the personality that you have is made up of all the things that you are conditioned to focus on. And we all have a pattern of the things that we focus on every single day. And we all have a very particular way that we focus on these things. We have very particular connections with people in our lives, whether it's coworkers, spouses, children, parents, whatever the case may be. You have a very particular connection with those things in your reality, but it's also in your brain. Your brain has these connections, and they're called neurocircuitry. What he says is the brain moves from being a record of the past to a map of your future when you start imagining new things or tuning into new potentials, new realities, even with the people in your life, even with the same circumstances. You're literally changing your brain. You're changing the neurocircuitry in your brain. So I want you to think about it like there's these little, I don't know how else to explain it, but I saw this video of like neurons in the brain, and they're like these little germs. We'll use germs. So if you ever see a germ in a pot in a lab where scientists are looking through a microscope, so you'll see like the germs connect and they'll like cross paths with each other. When you think about something very particularly and you have an emotion around it, you're making connections with those germs in your brain. We'll think about it like that, in your brain. When you stop yourself in the middle of something that's familiar, the way you think about it, you're actually breaking those connections temporarily because you've done it so much over time, you have these relationships. But when you stop it in the middle of the pattern, you break the bond temporarily. Let's say when you stop it, you tune into something new. You say, okay, I have this horrible relationship with my coworker. I want to change that. You tune into a potential where that problem no longer exists. And now what you're doing is giving your body a taste of fulfillment because now your imagination is happening. Your body doesn't know it's imagining. It thinks it's real because that's what happens with the subconscious mind. And you're saying, I want to have a pleasant relationship with this coworker. And you imagine that. You feel into it. Now, what's happening is you interrupted that pattern, it broke apart, and now you're starting to create new connections, right? But that connection is not going to be permanent unless you repetitiously continue to return to it. Because the same way you fell into the pattern of having a terrible relationship with your coworker is going to have to be the same way that you break that pattern and create a new pattern in your mind, at least with that coworker, because it starts here, right? So that's what Joe was trying to get us to understand, that our brain will move from being a record of the past and it'll instead become a map of the future, because as we recondition our bodies to a new mind by giving it the taste of fulfillment, by tapping into our autonomic nervous system, our ANS, which is the part of our subconscious mind that runs on autopilot without us knowing. That's why it's subconscious. But we will condition our brains and it'll start to show. Like if you actually got measurement done on your brain, you'd actually see the difference of how your brain has changed by just giving it new experiences, even if it is just in meditation or imagination. So this reminded me that every time I revisit a disappointment, I'm wiring my brain even deeper with that disappointment. That was my takeaway. And when I recognized that, especially when it was with things that I did not want, such as disappointment, right? Every time you replay a memory, you are hardwiring that deeper and deeper into your program. I was disappointed to learn that because once I grew aware of that, my next question was, how the hell do I stop it? Because some of those patterns are not anything that I want to take with me to my future ever, right? And that's why I decided to do this work. That's when I found Dr. Joe. I told my story many times in some of my other lives. But when I chose new thoughts like gratitude, peace, possibility, I realized that I was creating a new pathway. And that's when I grew passionate about continuously showing up for myself. because it's easy to be reminded of what's familiar. As a matter of fact, when you start this work, you will start to see how hard it is sometimes to stop yourself in the middle of a pattern, even when you know you shouldn't be doing it, because you know that the more you repeat it, the more it's getting hardwired, right? And the more it's going to take work for you to undo that. So it's not just emotional. This is neurological. This is happening. It's all happening in our brains first and foremost. And that's where the magic is. It really is. And I thank God for Dr. Joe being brave enough. And I say brave because he talked about how he almost didn't do this work. He almost wanted to hide because he was in that documentary. I don't know if you guys know about this documentary. It's called Heal. And it was really popular at one point. And he was in that documentary. And he said right after that, he kind of wanted to stop teaching altogether because people in the science community are so used to the norm, right? They started saying that what he was talking about was pseudoscience. They didn't recognize it as actually reputable. So they were like, oh, yeah, he's just doing, woo woo stuff. Fast forward to 2025, a whole lot of those scientists are now showing up at his workshops because they see that he got the sauce. Something is going on over there, that people are able to have miraculous healings, that people are able to manifest things seemingly out of nowhere, that they're changing their lives, that they're feeling like the old version of them was a totally different life. Like I've heard some of these testimonials of people talk about how they literally feel like a different person, to the point where they talk about their past and it's like explaining the life of somebody completely different. They're talking about it as if it's not even them, which, some things ain't worth remembering. If you ask me personally, I don't think some things are worth remembering. Okay, so I did get a question on this part two, changing the brain. This person says, can I really rewire my brain just by focusing on new thoughts? Yes, you can. But you ready for this news? Consistency matters. Yeah. That's why I always talk about on my TikTok, or if you watch my videos before I started this series, I talk a lot about being disciplined, having consistency, showing up repetitiously, or how repetition is the key foundation of all learning. Because a single positive thought is a great start. It's a spark, but that's about it, right? Like it doesn't change anything if 99% of the time you're thinking negative or you're thinking things that are rooted in the past. You're keeping yourself here 99% of the time. So you see how imbalanced that is? So you can rewire your brain by focusing on new thoughts, but it has to be repetitiously. So a small emotion, when you add that to the repetitious thoughts, like what we talk about when Joe tells us to tune into a new potential, when we're in meditation and he gets us to like forget about our entire identity, forget about all the connections you have, all the stories that you have, all the circumstances that aren't to your liking, forget about who you think you are in this reality for a moment. And you go into what he calls the unified field, the void, and you're lingering there. It feels really good, not gonna lie. Once you hit that sweet spot, it feels so good. But then when he tells you now, tune into that potential, live that future now. How would you act? How would you feel? How would you think? How would you love? You are literally using your emotions to connect with who you think you would be in that particular potential. Because remember, the unified field is infinite potentials. That is the infinite. And it's hard to fathom what infinite really means, but it's more than any of us can count, right? But we're only focused on a small fraction, 0.0000000. I don't know how many zeros. But our own personal perception is very limited because each individual can only perceive what is familiar to them. And what's familiar is what you've been practicing, what you've lived, right? Like your experience is what's familiar. But what if you haven't experienced something before? You can't perceive what you've never experienced. This is why I find it really hard these days to really pass judgment on other people for thinking different from me, because I don't know someone else's life. I don't know what they've lived. I don't know, you know, what they've been through, how they've been taught to perceive things. And that's what influences everybody's lens. Like we all see so differently because we have so many different experiences and we all experience things so very differently. So, going back to the original question, can you change your brain waves just by focusing on new thoughts? Absolutely. But it takes practice, right? It's a practice of reminding your brain that this is who I am now. I don't care what happened 5 minutes ago. I don't care if I was slipping back into old thoughts. I don't care if, whatever happened, I don't care. Because if infinite potentials exist, why would I limit myself by continuing to tell a limited story? That's not fair to me. That's not very loving to me. Why would I limit myself? And we all do it subconsciously, unconsciously. We don't know we're doing that. We don't know we're limiting ourselves by continuing to tell limited stories instead of being open to possibility, the infinite possibility that actually exists. And as Dr. Joe said, I said in the beginning of this live, that the unified field is the field of infinite potentials that already exist. We are not creating anything from scratch. I don't care what it is you can see for yourself. You're not creating anything. There's a potential that exists already in this unified field, and all you're doing is tuning into it like a radio dial. That's it. It has a very unique signature, it has a very unique frequency. And what is that frequency? It's made up of your thoughts, it's made up of your emotions. That is your personality, it's how you exist. So, whatever potential life you want to create for yourself, you're just tuning into who you think you're going to be as that version of you. What kind of thoughts are you going to think? How are you going to handle problems? Like, what kind of emotional state are you going to occupy majority of the time? If you could imagine that, tune into it. In the meditation, he tells you, live that future now, tune into it. And you're not creating anything new. You're practicing getting your brain waves used to the goodness that you actually want, rather than sabotaging by saying, this isn't going to work. This isn't going to happen. Why? Because it hasn't happened before. Because I don't have a personal reference. Because I don't have proof in my reality. Law of attraction, law of assumption teaches embody it first and then it materializes, not the other way around. Become it and then you'll see it. So, question number 2, I hope that helps, by the way. Didn't mean to just jump, but question number 2, this person says, what if I keep slipping into old thought patterns? That's exactly what I just talked about. It's very normal. As a matter of fact, that is the work. That is the work. Nobody wakes up one day, tries something for a few times, and all of a sudden becomes a guru. If they profess that or claim to be that, run, because it's not virtually possible if you're human. As a matter of fact, I rock with Dr. Joe Dispenza so much because he is very vulnerable and admits this very often. If you listen to his podcast, if you listen to some of the footage from his workshops, the testimonials, he'll say, listen, guys, I've been teaching this for years and I still forget. I still forget. The great masters still forgot. They weren't perfect. Even Jesus. Jesus in the Bible found himself in circumstances and situations where he cried out to God because he was not believing in those moments. What does that tell you? It tells you that the flesh, the human side of him, hit him like a ton of bricks in those moments. And he had to be reminded. And how do you get reminded? You get reminded through practice. When you every time you catch yourself, consider that a victory. Your old self is just familiar. And so your subconscious does what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to keep you safe. It's supposed to keep you feeling like, okay, we're good now. And how does it do that? By reminding you of things that are familiar. But familiarity is not final. It doesn't dictate what has to happen from this moment forward. You do. When you catch yourself, don't shame yourself. That's a big one. When you catch yourself, I want you to consider yourself like a toddler learning how to walk. Okay? When you see a toddler, or if you have kids, you know when your kids were toddlers, they were crawling at first and then they would stand on things and their knees would buckle. and they weren't perfect and they will fall. But what would you say to them? Uh-oh, get back up. Uh-oh, let's try again. Oh, good job. You were so loving, so patient, so kind with that child. And that's what you got to be with yourself as you're changing, because change, I don't care what nobody says, it's not easy. It's not freaking easy. It's one of the hardest things to do. If change were easy, everybody would sign up for it, but they don't. It's easier to point the finger and blame other people and blame our government and blame our parents and blame everything external, our circumstances, our education. It's so easy to place the blame out there. Why? Because if I took my power back and took accountability for how I'm showing up, that means that I would have to do something different if I'm not getting the results I want. That means I would have to change. And guess what? That might be a little hard. It's hard to change because you got to stick with it. You got to be accountable. You got to be consistent. You got to be disciplined. You got your yeses got to be yeses. Your no's got to be no's. If you say I'm no longer going to be this way, you're not going to straddle. And when you do, listen, that's a part of the process, right? Like, it's not about being perfect. It's about catching yourself. And when you know you don't want to continue down that path, you do what Dr. Joe says in the middle of the meditation. He says, change. You change, because living by those old emotions of the past was never loving to you. It was never loving to you, and it doesn't feel good. So that's what we're on to. You just want to gently direct yourself, direct your focus back to your new vision, back to the personality who gets to have what it is you actually desire, whether that's improved health or perfect health, whether that's improved relationships, better opportunities, jobs, abundance, money, whatever the case may be. Who is that version of you? What emotions do they normally feel as a result of having those prayers answered, that wish fulfilled? And that moment of awareness is already a sign of your change. So rather than looking out into your reality for evidence of, have I changed? Have things changed? Am I doing it right? If you could just grow aware enough to know when you're not in alignment with that reality, when you're not in alignment with that thinking, when you're not aligned with your highest self, that awareness alone is your evidence. That is your evidence that you're already changing. It's happening. I've been doing a series of the silent season on TikTok, and it's actually becoming more popular than I realized. But a lot of people are in what I call the silent season, or what most people refer to as waiting, right? When they've been doing all the things, they've been showing up for themselves in the ways that they think they should, or that they've been taught by a coach or whoever, and it just seems like nothing is happening. But I want you to know something is always happening. Just because you can't see behind the veil does not mean movement is not taking place. It absolutely is always taking place. And even if you're not perfect, like this person says, what if I keep slipping into old thought patterns? It's not about being perfect. It's about shortening your reactionary period. So if you've been rehearsing something, or you have a negative pattern with something or someone, rather than letting it linger as long as you usually do, catch yourself and say, you know what? I'm about to argue with this person and I don't feel like it. Or I've been arguing with this person. I'm tired of it. Let me stop this right now. Stop. That's awareness. And then shift. That little act, it seems small, but it's huge, because it's literally you, number one, rewiring your brain, that neurocircuitry, those connections in the brain that you have with those patterns, you're interrupting them. You keep doing that. That's repetition. That's how you really hardwire something new. And number two, you're changing your personality. And as Dr. Joe says, your personality creates your personal reality. So if you're changing your personality, and certain parts of your personality change in such a drastic way, certain aspects of your current reality cannot exist with a new personality. It just can't. Think about how friendships, for example, come in seasons. You might be friends with someone when you're younger because y'all have certain things in common. Maybe I remember when I was younger, I used to be well, actually, let me not lie. I was going to tell y'all a story about how I was boy crazy. I was never boy crazy. I grew up with three brothers. I'm the only girl, but my friends were very boy crazy. So I guess what we had in common is I would listen to them talk about boys, and then I would give them my insight because I had brothers. But then it came to a point where, like, maybe I did hit a boy crazy phase when I was like late teens, early 20s. And so some of the things that my friends had talked about then, we kind of fell out of alignment because they were in a different chapter. So maybe I had my growth spurt later. I don't know. I don't know where I was going with that story, but I just wanted to share that sometimes certain things that you used to be into no longer fits the personality of your future self that you're being now. And you'll know it because those things energetically just fall by the wayside, or they naturally evolve. And I'm not saying you go to cut people off or that you stop having to be friends or connected with people. What I am saying though is there will be a natural shift, and you will know what that shift is. You'll feel it. You know, maybe you won't be as inclined to hang around certain people, or maybe you'll be more inclined to hang around certain people. You'll be less into certain topics over here and more into topics over there. As you change, things around you change. As your personality changes, your personal reality changes. And I hope that helps because I just went on a whole tangent. But part number 3 of chapter 3 of Becoming Supernatural is where Dr. Joe Dispenza talks about how we marry a clear intention with an elevated emotion. And this part is more about manifestation. So if you're like a fan of like Neville Goddard, and who talks about law of assumption, a lot of what he teaches is about the feeling, right? Living in the end. And as my favorite Reverend Ike used to say, feeling gets the blessing, right? If you feel yourself into being that version of you who you already desire to be, that means you have very clear thoughts. And those very clear thoughts are tied to very clear emotions. And Dr. Joe says manifestation is basically a clear intention, your thought or mind, with an elevated emotion, which he tells us is an emotion of the heart, such as joy, love, gratitude, all those really, really high vibrational, high frequency emotions. He says this combination becomes a powerful electromagnetic field or electromagnetic signature to the field. As I've talked about before, as he talks about in the book, we are all electromagnetic beings. We all have our own energy signature. Some people refer to it as an aura. Dr. Joe refers to it as electromagnetic signature or field or frequency that we each have. Most people only use one or the other. Most people only use either thought or emotion. But when they're combined, you move into alignment. So your thoughts and emotions, your set point frequency is, I like to call it that, because for the most part, we all know, if you actually sit and think about it, how you mostly exist throughout your day. What emotions do you mostly feel throughout the day? It took me a while to understand what my natural set point was, and I was almost embarrassed because I had already started doing a lot of this work. And in doing a lot of this work, when I realized that I was existing in anxiety a lot of the time, I was like, oh, that's what I've been doing. I've been living anxiously. That's not a good energy to be around. And I know that now, especially because now that I find myself a lot more calmer, with a lot more um, centeredness, wholeness, when I'm around anxious people, it's so uncomfortable. But I feel bad because I know what it's like for them because I was once living like that. Yeah. But anyways, when he talked about having a clear intention with an elevated emotion, that part really blew me away because it explained why some manifestations feel stuck. Like I might be clear on what I want, but if I'm still feeling doubt, pressure, or anything negative, it cancels the signal, right? Like if I'm saying I want to manifest $1 million, but then I'm looking at how I think it has to happen, maybe through the lottery, and then I think to myself, well, what are the chances of that? And I start naturally going on a tangent with those kind of thoughts. I'm not in alignment with having that money because I've found myself back in a pattern that cancels out the high vibration, the elevate with the clear intention with an elevated emotion. I canceled it out. So elevated emotion is the fuel to how we really, how do you say, supersize, supercharge our manifestations. And I know this for a fact for my own life, and I can bank on it that you probably know or can recall a time in your own life where you manifested something. You had a very clear intention. Maybe it was the college that you attended. For me, I wanted to go to a very particular college, the University of Miami here in South Florida. It was my dream school. I was very clear on it. And as Napoleon Hill in Think and Grow Rich taught me, burn all bridges of retreat. And that's exactly what I did. I didn't apply to a single other school. Very clear intention. And then for my elevated emotion, my mom would do this cool thing where she would come, like we would take the train because the train dropped you right off on the campus. And we would catch the train and I would go walk across campus. I was putting myself in the frequency of being a student at my dream school long before it ever happened. I started making connections with people, telling them that I was coming to the school. I hadn't even applied yet. I'm talking about years before. As a matter of fact, I met one of my best friends while doing one of these trips on campus, putting myself in the frequency, elevating not just my emotions, but like really feeling like I was her. I'm the student who's going to graduate from this school. And I tuned into that. And lo and behold, I did apply. And less than 2 months later, I got my acceptance. And the rest is history, 2 degrees later. But you can recall something in your past that you've done the same. And it could be something as big as what I talked about, like your dream school, or it could be a cup of coffee. Whatever the case, we have these abilities. We've always been manifestors. Like, I find it funny every time I hear people talk about, I don't know how to manifest. Like, what? Like, I don't think you understand that you've always been a co-creator. Humanity has always been co-creators. It's just that now that time has evolved, we got to look back and study what we did so we can reverse engineer and do it intentionally. There's no such thing as learning how to manifest. You know how to manifest. You've been doing it your whole life. You've been manifesting things that you want and things that you don't. So yeah, I don't know. That always tickles me, by the way. Ooh, this was good. Someone submitted a question for part 3. They said, what if I have the intention, but I can't access elevated emotions yet? What if I have the intention, but I can't access elevated emotions? I get that because, as a matter of fact, I think it's something that I'm working through myself with an intention that I have, but it's kind of, I'm like, I don't know how to feel into that yet. I would say what I'm doing, start small. I love having learned about Neville before I got into Dr. Joe's work. And I mean, like, I love Neville because one of the things he teaches is revision and also inner conversations. And I love them both as two techniques that I intertwine with this work. So if I can't feel an elevated emotion right away, what I'll do is if it's a block or a negative story around the topic, I'll revise it. Why do I revise it? I revise it because it puts me in a different emotional state around the topic. You want to get to at least a neutral space around the topic. If you're in a negative space, revise. If you're not in a negative space, you're in a neutral space, then I would say from there, do an inner conversation. Because what I found is that inner conversations are just as effective as visualization. Because if you've ever heard, like, think about it, you know people in your life, you know what their voice sounds like. What Neville teaches in inner conversations is hear people that you're familiar with telling you things that confirm that what you are imagining is actually already so. So, like, let's say you want a new job. Imagine you're calling your mom or a parent or a sibling and you're telling them the good news and they're congratulating you. Or you've been at the job, go even further into the manifestation. You've been at the job for about 6 months and they're telling you, so how's that job going? And you're telling them all the good news. And you hear them saying, man, I'm so proud of you. I remember when you were just talking about it, right? That to me is just as equal as a visualization. It puts me in the right state. So start small with something like that. You don't have to feel bliss immediately, by the way. I feel like I don't really get supercharged excited with things unless I really, really repeat it that much. And even still, like, think about it. Most of your manifestations or the things that you desire don't have a whole lot of excitement around it, right? Like, if you, I'm not saying like winning the lottery, but if you want true wealth, your path to true wealth, you're probably not going to be that excited all the time. You might have moments of excitement, but being wealthy means that this feels normal. Like, I'm relieved. This feels normal, right? That's what most manifestations are going to feel like. Once you have that job and you settled in, you won't be like, oh my God, I got the job. You're going to be like, oh, work is nice. I love how I'm progressing. This feels normal. So that's what you want to get to. And I would also say begin with gratitude for anything, like whatever the topic is. If you can't feel into a high emotion, just be grateful. Like, "Ah, I'm so grateful that this happened." Or what I talked about in a previous video in part 3, I think, relief. Relief is a really good emotion that doesn't get enough credit in manifestation processes, because 9 times out of 10, no matter what you're trying to manifest, when you actually get it, you feel a sense of relief. And what is relief? It feels like, wow, that went well. That was good, right? Or that was awesome. So relief is a good one. Gratitude is another one. Gratitude opens the door to higher emotions like joy, love, and freedom. But ultimately, the more you practice any of these, the easier it becomes to generate those feelings on command. So practice makes, I used to say practice makes mastery. Practice makes mastery. Question number 2. What happens if I am emotionally elevated but don't have a clear vision? Now that's the opposite. That's a good one. That's the opposite. You're emotionally elevated but you don't have a clear vision. Honestly, I think that's the better position to be in. Even though there's no hierarchy here, I think it's better to just feel good, because what happens is, if you can just keep yourself or just mostly maintain elevated emotions, then you're going to attract to yourself things that continue to match that frequency, whether you have a clear intention or not. I feel like you're just going to be magnetized to things that keep you feeling good. At least that's how I understand it. I say you still feel better, but you may not attract specific outcomes, right? Like, and to me, I'd rather just live a really, really happy life and not always be so hell bent. Because sometimes, I will tell you, in my experience, sometimes being very specific puts you in a position of wanting to control things, because you feel like, no, it has to be like this. And sometimes we get very married to what it is we're intending for, and feeling like we got to somehow control when it happens, how it happens, or if it doesn't happen yet, we get discouraged. And I feel like that is a lot of ego. So to me, like, shoot, if I could be like this, man, I'm the opposite. I'm the opposite. But anyways, your emotions are actually really, really powerful, but pairing them with clarity just directs them like a laser, basically. And that's what I mean. Like, you get so directed like a laser that anything that's not exactly what it is you're aiming for, you're like, ah. But what if the universe is trying to give you something better? I don't believe in the statement this or something better, by the way. So let me not even go down that rabbit hole. But what I would say is, what if what you thought was the greatest thing ever, there's something that's slightly better, but you don't know because you don't have it in your awareness? I'm open to possibility. I want what I want, but I'm open to possibility, right? I would also say, when you are elevated emotionally, even if you don't have a clear intention, I feel like the field begins shaping itself into whatever your intention is once you start to get clear. So just stick with it. It's a process. It's a practice. Yeah. I hope that helped. I feel like I'm rambling because I did not eat, by the way. I just hopped right on here. And it's 8:44, which will be a late dinner for me. But this chapter is extremely rich. Whew. It was a lot to unpack in this chapter. But if you take nothing else from tonight's live, I want you to take this. You're not waiting on the universe. You're not waiting for anything. The universe is waiting on your alignment. It's waiting on you to show up, as Neville Goddard and Reverend Ike likes to say, as the one to get the blessing. You're embodying the version of you who's already in alignment. So what you think and what you feel and where you place your attention, that's what creates your next reality. Don't matter what happened 5 minutes ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Who do you want to be? Who are you now? Who do you want to be? And what you think, what you feel, and where your attention is, because again, attention is the greatest currency in this existence. Forget what you heard. People pay millions and billions of dollars per year to keep your attention. It's a reason for that. Because where your attention is where your money goes. Where your attention is what you constantly create from. So this week, I want to challenge you guys. I want to challenge you to be intentional. I want to challenge you to feel elevated. I want to challenge you to tune in and not just wish for anything. I shared a video on my TikTok where I talked about how I am manifesting an experience. And I've done it multiple times before. And every time I did it, I embodied already having it. Right? So don't just wish for something. Bring that energy. Ventilla, you found Dr. Joe 3 weeks ago. You've been doing 4 a.m. meditations for 3 weeks. Today you found me and you were looking for a person like me. Oh my God, I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful that you found me. That means the algorithm is working because my intention is to connect with whoever wants to connect with me on this topic, in this community, to help one another do what we're doing, and that's evolve. I love this community that we're building, and I'm so proud of how you are showing up for yourself, Ventilla. The fact that you found Dr. Joe just 3 weeks ago at 4, you were doing 4 a.m. meditations for 3 weeks. That's commitment. First of all, congratulations, because that's big. That means you're serious. And tell me, how are you feeling from doing those meditations? Because I know it changed my life. That's why I'm here. Like, I learned about Dr. Joe 5 years ago. 5 years ago. And 5 years later, I'm still talking about him. So much so that I'm reading his book on YouTube. Yeah, I'm proud of you. I'm proud of all of us, because it's, like I said, change isn't easy. If it were easy, everybody would be signing up for it. But when you start understanding the science behind change and what we're actually doing when we don't know this information, I was more appalled at the things I did not know I was doing than what I was actually doing. Are you saying it's changing? It's changing you? Listen, it's great stuff. It's great information, great content, life altering. I got so many people into this work before I even started talking about it publicly. My life has been changing from the inside out. I would say I have more internal changes that have happened. The way that I exist, how I see myself, how I love myself is so drastically different than before I did this work. Like I said, I've always known I was a powerful manifester, but I did not know my limitations even in that. And I did not understand that our bodies are a huge part of how we're even able to do any of this. And unless we learn ourselves and learn our bodies, we'll be working against them rather than with them. We'll be bad managers of them. You know, when disease strikes and you're relying on a medical system, a healthcare system that's limited in its own ways, and you are going only by the research that they have at the moment, which is limited in its own ways, which is why Dr. Joe could come along and teach the stuff that he's teaching with newer research. But you limit yourself and you succumb to whatever you believe, whatever you accept and surrender to. So if you say you have a disease or you have something and someone tells you, your doctor tells you you're going to die, you're going to accept and surrender to that because that's all you know. When you don't know what you don't know, you can't grow. So you said I found it's changing my life. I have a chronic illness, and after man-made medicine not working, I needed another way. I found it. Wow. Yeah, that's literally how so many people come into this work. through chronic illness. I don't share a lot about my personal life because sometimes, people get a little crazy when you start putting yourself out there. But I work in the healthcare field. I work with very, very ill people. I've had loved ones that have had the disease type that I work with, um, and it doesn't have good statistics at all. So I understand the position you may have been in with whatever your chronic illness is. I don't know the severity of it, and it's okay if you don't share. But when I started seeing the testimonials on Dr. Joe's page, the stories of transformation, that's what really keeps me inspired. Because as Dr. Joe said, all it takes is one example of possibility. When we didn't know that someone could run a mile in 4 minutes. I mean, I'm sorry, is it the 1 minute mile? It's a 1 minute mile. I think I'm saying that right. Correct me if I'm wrong. But when we didn't know that people could run a mile in a short span of time, we just thought it took, a really long time until one person did it. And then all of a sudden, other people started doing it because all they needed was one stroke of possibility to believe in themselves and to keep trying. So I'm really glad you found this work. I'm so glad you found me. I am super excited. No matter when you're watching this content, if you're watching, a lot of my viewers actually watch in hindsight and they comment on my videos. So that's why I'm not like bashful about having a few people on my live because I know y'all come back. And I love that for us. But I'm so glad that I started doing this because I feel like you, the minute you send an intention out into the universe, especially when it's charged with a passionate emotion, you get your answers and the unfolding happens. You found me. And I'm going to say this, and you'll find a lot of connections happening while you're doing this work. A lot of synchronicities is what Dr. Joe calls them all the time. But the synchronicity for this moment is that I answered the call because I knew that I would be doing something that would be a solution to somebody else. I didn't know who. I still don't. I don't know how many. I really that doesn't even phase me. I don't really care about that. But I know that it's helpful. And even if it's only you, the people that show up here, the people that watch, I'm totally fine with that. But I know that me showing up is the answer to somebody else's prayer. We are all the missing puzzle piece to someone else's puzzle. I used to say that to my students when I taught grade school in the inner city. We are all the missing puzzle piece to someone else's puzzle. So when you show up to your divine self, your divine calling, things that really move you, when you pay attention to those nudges, you don't know whose prayers you're actually answering. You don't know whose puzzle piece you are to finish their puzzle. Anyways, I can go on and on forever, but I'm hungry and I'm going to start rambling because I'm hungry. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to end my live here, but I am going to say this. I did have a little note that I didn't want to forget. Let's see. I'm going to say this. I will see you on Friday night as we dive into parts 4 and 5. And spoiler alert, the next section includes one of the most powerful manifestation stories in the whole book. So please be on the lookout for parts 4 and 5. They will actually hit my YouTube. I actually recorded them on the weekend, but I got them pre-scheduled for Wednesday morning. That's tomorrow. So yeah, be on the lookout 4 and 5. And then on Friday, we go live again. So yeah, I don't know who needs to hear this, but this is your reminder. And you got this. Bye, guys.